If you put a camera on an athlete running, on a woman running, and she's really digging into that last bit of reserve that she's got, isolate her face on that camera, and I defy you to tell the difference between that reaction and the reaction that she's likely to have under the stress of sex.
You got me yearning, burning with desire. You set my heart and soul on fire.
We got guys on our team probably never been to a club. We got guys who never leave a club, you know?
You just kind of continue your college life. It's a good old fraternity out there.
But I still would tell my sister, don't ever date an athlete.
Their bodies are how they make their living, and their bodies are very important to them, and their bodies become very important to other people.
It's not feminine, but it's a woman thing now. You can be a woman and be a beautiful woman and have muscles.
There's a similar passion expressed in the bedroom, the closeness, the intimacy. There's no other place except in sports that people get that kind of crazy about.
You're in town on Wednesday, but another team is in town on Thursday and Friday. It's not like she's only in love with your one team.
Homosexuality is talked about a lot, but in a very negative way. And you feel like, I can't be a great athlete if I'm gay.
Everything is sold with sex appeal, whether you like it or not, and this is the way it was going to be if we were going to play for more money.
Tiger Woods looks good. If Tiger Woods were ugly, he wouldn't be making what he's making.
I think sports are just sensual. You can't help but notice their bodies.
She ran just as fast as men, but damn, looked like a woman.
Sport is primarily about the competition. But beneath the surface of every event, every match, and every game, there is a basic connection between sports and sexuality. Anyone who has ever touched a ball has been touched by the power of athletics to shape what is masculine and what is feminine in America. The sports world's attitudes towards sexuality have evolved over the past 100 years, sometimes dramatically ahead of the curve, sometimes woefully behind. But always a powerful sense of taboo, of what is and is not acceptable, has influenced athletes, male and female, straight and gay. But sport and sex are linked in another more vivid way too, because sport is also perhaps the finest, most natural presentation of the body beautiful. After all, sport involves men and women who are on display in the prime of their lives, when they are most physically attractive and alluring.
We like to look at bodies. We like to look at beautiful bodies. We like to look at beautiful bodies in motion. And that's, a very important aspect of sports.
Generally what people see in track and field athletes is that the lines are almost perfect. They have the curves. It's just like those fine lines of a car. When you see a car that has a nice color, nice fine lines, you say, wow, that's a sexy looking car.
I think fans get a rush looking at athletes, giving it all they've got, leaving their guts out there, seeing the perspiration just pour off their brow and their entire bodies.
It's an intrinsically pleasing thing to watch beyond the game itself, but it's there without trying to be there.
The sheer pleasure of watching the human form has the deepest roots in our civilization. The ancient Greeks watched their athletes perform naked at the Olympics. The root for the word gymnasium is gymnos. It has nothing to do with sport. It means nude.
The whole idea of athletes participating virtually nude was to demonstrate the connection between athletic achievement, the perfect body, and the blessings of the gods.
The Greeks began with the assumption that the human body in motion was in itself attractive. It was an image of grace and strength and skill, and they thought it was beautiful.
The celebration of the athlete and the athletic form is very much with us today. Even more than movie stars, male athletes have become our Greek gods. We associate them with vitality, success, as well as sex appeal in ways that transcend their profession. And it is not just a cliche that the boys who play games will always leave the stadium with the prettiest girls.
I asked Isaiah when I played, why were all these women at the games? He said, John, we do aerobics for 2 hours straight in our shorts and our tank tops. So in their minds, or in people's minds, these guys are physically in shape. That's what we consider to be sexy.
When you watch them perform whatever it is that they're doing, there's a certain amount of strength and power and grace and dominance to some extent. And then you're talking about very young, vibrant, multimillionaires walking franchises. And that is appealing to a lot of women.
While there have always been women athletes who were considered attractive, they were the exception. Today, in popular culture, the image of the ideal woman's body is not just limited to the hourglass. Powerful muscles can be as appealing as curves. Now, we celebrate the female athletic body, just as we have always admired the male.
Female athletes now have a great appeal to men. There was a time when that was certainly not true. There was a time when if a woman played sports, she was considered anything but a sexual or a sensual or an attractive object. Now, muscles are sexy.
You have Serena and Venus with their showing their big muscles, 15 years ago, they would not be wearing those outfits with those bodies. You better hide it because you would scare people. Now it's like, wow, look at those biceps, look at those shoulders, it's beautiful.
To understand better how sex and sport connect to the 21st century requires a look back to the start of the 20th, back to the football fields of the all-male Ivy League universities. There, the flower of upper-class Anglo-Saxon America was brutalizing one another as a way of proving their manliness. The sport was so violent that 18 players were killed in 1905 alone. In the face of critics who wanted to ban the game, President Teddy Roosevelt convened a meeting at the White House to preserve football.
Don't flinch, don't fall, and hit the line on.
He was very committed to football and any other combative, aggressive sports because he felt that American men, middle-class men, were increasingly effeminate and lacked any kind of manly, forthright courage.
Football, I think, became a place to kind of stoke men's competitive fires and encourage men into an aggressive but controlled kind of masculinity that would strengthen them for the leadership role that Roosevelt envisioned for educated white men.
10 of Roosevelt's Rough Riders had given football player as their occupation. And they were precisely the type of men Roosevelt wanted fighting beside him. These wealthy young gentlemen of the American social elite were supposed to be latter-day knights, strong of body, athletic and virile, but at the same time, morally strong enough to put Satan behind them and resist the temptations of sex.
Even if you weren't a soldier, you could still prove that you were manly and courageous and brave on the sports field, so that sports become a kind of substitute for the prowess that men had exhibited as hunters, as warriors. And Christianity makes its first compromises with sports and with the erotic in the form of what was called muscular Christianity.
But even as muscular Christianity tried to keep sex from rearing its ugly head in our fun and games, there were others who felt quite the opposite, especially if they could make a profit out of promoting healthy sensuality. Bernard McFadden was a contemporary of Roosevelt's. Like the president himself, McFadden had been a sickly child, but he made himself into a strong man. He published Physical Culture, a phenomenally popular magazine, and he toured the nation lecturing and presenting specimens of physical fitness.
He was proclaiming to everyone who was ready to listen that athletic men are sexy and athletic women are sexy and there's no real love life without firm muscles.
McFadden's eagerness to explore the connection between sex and sports landed him in trouble. In 1905, the New York City Police Department arrested McFadden on obscenity charges, days before women in union suits were to appear at Madison Square Garden to participate in his physique competition. The show went on before an overflow crowd, but critics suspected that McFadden was also helping to unleash a female sexual explosion.
The understanding of women's sports is that it was part of women's liberation from tradition. Athletics was fundamentally understood as a masculine activity. For women to enter that arena meant to really undermine that system. The real fear is that they would become uninhibited and possibly exploited, or begin to act, that some kind of heterosexual passion would be unleashed.
Oh, you beautiful doll, you great big beautiful doll.
Meanwhile, male promoters understood all too well the money to be made by connecting sport with sex. So they did all they could to have women athletes look as attractive as possible for the men in the audience.
Babe Didrikson played on a basketball team, an industrial team. The women's team didn't draw many spectators. They changed the outfits, put them in shorts, and the number of spectators jumped from 200 a night to something like 5,000.
Women's basketball was wildly popular in the U.S. for decades. Fans loved to cheer for hometown teams at tournaments sponsored by the Amateur Athletic Union. But they weren't drawn there just to see the game. Promoters saw a chance to sell athletic ability and feminine sex appeal at the same time. So they arranged for players to compete not just in tournament play, but in beauty pageants too.
The AAU magazine always had one photo of the team that won the tournament and one photo of the beauty queen with a tiara and roses in hand and sometimes knee pads, along with her court.
They've got to be good to throw the discus, but then they should. Maybe girls get that way tossing dishes around the kitchen.
This sort of attitude horrified women in charge of female athletics, and it only strengthened their resolve to isolate women in sport, segregating them from men. But while physical educators were trying to save young women athletes from sexual exploitation, this tactic would boomerang in ways that few could have foreseen.
As they tried to make it as exclusively female as it could be, so that only women were participating, refereeing, coaching, and sometimes only women, fellow students in the audience, what backfired is that when popular understandings of the danger of sexuality in sport shifted to ones that feared same-sex relations rather than heterosexual relations, they had sort of set themselves up for suspicion and condemnation.
So women's sport was branded with the label of lesbianism, driving away girls who, happy to be tomboys, were fearful of growing up to be thought of as tom men. The irony is that while accusations of homosexuality were used against women's sport, lesbians, in fact, helped sustain athletics for women.
The truth is, if it wasn't for lesbians, there probably wouldn't be a thriving women's sports in America. It was lesbians who played all the games when women were allowed to glow but not sweat or perspire.
Straight women were beholden to husbands who wouldn't let them take sports seriously, or they wanted to find a husband, and in order to find a husband, they couldn't take sports seriously. So it was the lesbians who were, in a sense, freer to be coaches, professional baseball players in the 40s, tennis players or golfers in the 50s. So these lesbians paved the way for all women and opened a lot of doors at a great cost often. I think feeling different and being alone and feeling isolated because of our sexuality in some ways gives us more courage, that we know it's always going to be more difficult and we're just going to let it fly.
For lesbians playing in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League during the 1940s, participation meant walking a tightrope between personal truth and public pretense.
It was a way of life, but it wasn't open.
In 1943, Josephine D'Angelo, a young gay woman, was assigned to the South Bend Blue Sox.
They didn't even use the word lesbians in those days. The girls didn't use the word lesbians or faggots. You heard the word queers. Both groups were queers, but that's all you heard.
The league advertised that the women played top-notch national pastime hardball. But typically, the promoters also sold good old-fashioned sex appeal. They dressed the players in short skirts on the field, and like ladies off. The women were asked to display sexuality, even if it wasn't their own.
We don't want you to walk like boys anymore. We want you to walk like girls. We want you to wear lipstick. We want you to have no severe haircuts and wear these cute little short skirts.
She's an example of both the richness and community that was available to her and simply fun and acceptance in sports, and how quickly that could turn. And she could lose something that was so incredibly valuable to her.
In her second season, D'Angelo's manager confronted Josephine on her return from the beauty parlor.
He said, I have a ticket for you to go back to Chicago. We're terminating you. And I said, well, is it my batting average? He just said, your hair is too short, and those are the rules, and you knew it when you came in. Goodbye. It always hurt me a lot because, you know, I was just a kid, you know. I was inexperienced. I didn't go in there wanting to come out like a man.
I think it helps us understand why even lesbians in sports, or people who aren't particularly homophobic but are concerned about the success and possibilities for women as athletes, are very careful and guarded and end up not talking about lesbianism because of its potential costs.
It's a whole new way of life. Now I'm free to go anywhere, do anything, see anybody anytime I want to.
After World War II, America settled down in peace and prosperity. But behind the serene suburban facade, the old sexual standards were open to dramatic new challenges. The Kinsey Report shocked the country with revelations about such taboo subjects as masturbation and premarital sex. Marlon Brando astounded Broadway with a raw, physical tour de force. James Dean burst forth from Hollywood with a brooding young sensuality, just as rock and roll loosed a primitive beat and a pretty boy whirling dervish named Elvis Presley. Yet in sport, the ideal remained the buttoned-down all-American boy, strong but pure. Mickey Mantle, the homespun god from Oklahoma, the crew-cutted Johnny Unitas, Gary Cooper in cleats, George Mikan, sturdy in horned rims, and Floyd Patterson, bashful, even tranquil. But all that would change in the 60s. Cassius Clay stormed loudly onto center stage, boasting of his beauty, then reveling in his sexual charisma.
Well, sexuality has always been associated in one way or another with the heavyweight champion of the world. There's something about knowing that this is the man who can beat up anybody else in the world in a fair fight, that gives him an aura, a power unlike any other title in sports.
So bad he has to go to the hospital, and I'm still pretty. What's he gonna say about that, huh?
One time, I was with him in Florida. The ring was set up in a field, and he dressed in a recreational vehicle off to the side. And after it was all over, he opened up his door, looked around, and pulled two women into the vehicle, closed the door, and the vehicle started to shake. So I wrote about it. And it was a magazine piece in the Times, and the headline was something about King of All Kings. About 4 or 5 months later, I ran into him, and he looked at me, and he said, yeah, you really showed them why they call me the King of All Kings, you know? I suddenly had this idea, well, that's a piece of his legend and publicity he was very happy to share with the world.
I just took a shower with Farrah Fawcett.
Shampoo, Joe. He just took a shower with Farrah Fawcett shampoo.
As a football player, Joe Namath possessed the same impeccable macho credentials as Ali. And as a quarterback playing in New York, Namath had the visibility to completely wash away whatever Victorian notions remained of the wholesome male athlete, even if the person himself might have been vastly different from the playboy character called Broadway Joe.
Well, he was a sex symbol in the same way that movie stars are sex symbols. Whether they really are or not, they become this. And I don't think it was anything that Joe sought, and I don't think it was anything he cultivated. Of course, he did some ads which may have used that image. I mean, it was basically Joe's agent saying, hey, this is a good deal, do it.
Now, I don't wear pantyhose, but if beauty mist can make my legs look good, imagine what they'll do for yours.
He kind of fulfilled all the vicarious needs of the emerging 60s fan. I think the only people who had any trouble with any of that were newspapermen, old newspapermen.
Sometimes they talk about drinking and conniving around with ladies and stuff. You know, it seems almost un-American to me for a bachelor not to marry, you know, go around having a drink with a lady now and then. And why all of a sudden that's becoming evil in me, I don't know, but some people don't like it. Well, you can't please everybody. I'm just trying to get along, you know, just trying to get by.
To me, Joe Namath was like football-throwing Hugh Hefner, you know, who had sort of come into a culture that, you know, maybe needed a little spicing up.
Joe couldn't move outside, you know, in the public places, in the restaurants, in, you know, the airports. Special arrangements had to be made to get him through the crowd, so get him to where he had to be.
Joe did a lot of this with a wink. He and Ali were the two best at saying and doing things with a wink. And saying, look at me, I'm kidding.
He was really more of the straight square football player than Johnny Unitas. Joe is very tough, and he really came out of the ethos of the locker room.
We pretty women, stand in line. We love you, baby. I'm a man. I spell
The locker room culture that a superstar like Namath dominates operates by its own set of sexual rules. On the one hand, super macho, and on the other, remarkably intimate.
I doubt if you will find another environment where two men wrapped only in towels will walk up to each other, hug each other, and say, hey, I really love you, man. I really appreciate you being here. You don't even see that in families.
Sports have been, for men, a place in which they could show their affection for other men without the fear that somebody would denounce them as a bunch of faggots or call them effeminate.
I love you. I love you. God, you made me proud.
As long as you're masculine, it's all right to pat another man on the butt, to hug him and tell him that I love you, to shower together. But the minute there's any hint that somehow a feminine dimension is coming into that situation, literally a steel curtain drops.
Well, I think with football, I mean, it's like everybody's a tough guy, you know, it's like, that's pretty much the atmosphere. I don't think that, you know, stuff like that, it never comes up. People don't talk about it. It's like, hey, we play football. We knock other men out. When, you know, we don't hold their hands, we knock them out.
Sport is so macho that the ultimate taunt is to label another athlete with a gay slur. In 1962, weighing in before a welterweight title fight, the champion, Benny Perrette, suggested that his opponent, Emil Griffith, was homosexual. Enraged, Griffith caught Perrette against the ropes in the 12th round and beat him unconscious. Perrette died 10 days later. In men's team sports, any admission, any hint of homosexuality has always been assumed to mean a figurative death for an athlete's career.
Any kind of sense of vulnerability or sensitivity or gayness is picked up pretty quickly in a male locker room by junior high school or high school. And unless those guys go very deep into the closet, there's a tendency for them to be pushed out of sports.
It's a violation of that perfect picture of this is our team, we're all guys, you know, we all go home to our women, we go to battle, we fight, you know, I take a bullet for you, same thing, you know, get up, get out there and play.
I don't think you would have been able to sign a professional baseball contract if anyone knew you were gay, so I think you would have to have a lifetime of denial.
It'd be worse than when Jackie Robinson came into the league, came into playing. I couldn't even explain. John Walker would be accepted, you know, into the NAACP first than a gay guy on the team. I just know how these guys, or how people would treat them.
When I spoke out, there was nothing. There was nothing out there.
Dave Kopay didn't dare to reveal his homosexuality while he was still playing professional football. Kopay played in the NFL for 9 seasons, from 1964 to 1972. It was another 3 years, though, before he came out of the closet. As a player, Kopay used the rough, tough football image to mask the reality that his sexuality was incompatible with his sport.
Once I started to feel and know where my true sexuality lay, I knew that I had to be tougher. I couldn't get hurt. I couldn't be a wimp. I couldn't, it definitely was a motivating force for me. I blocked for the quarterback well, and I did well on the special teams, so they're kind of saying, well, gee, he couldn't be queer because he can break the wedge, or he's certainly not a sissy.
Of the over 15,000 men who have played in the NFL, only Kopay and a lineman named Roy Simmons have revealed their homosexuality. In Major League Baseball, Glenn Burke and Billy Beane have come out, but only after their careers were over.
I never really thought about my homosexuality until I was well into my 20s, and I think I was so driven that I made myself push it away.
The burden of being a gay man in a team sport is so enormous that it is difficult to imagine an athlete fulfilling his athletic potential while carrying the secret of homosexuality.
It's basically living like a fugitive. You are lying about every part of your personal life. You know, I felt like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders, and I was an obscure, marginal outfielder in the major leagues. Can you imagine if you were a superstar whose organization invested millions in you and was supposed to, you know, handle the pressure, and all I want to do is be able to walk up to the plate with a clear head and hit a 95-mile-an-hour fastball. And it's not an easy thing to do if your head is in the wrong place.
While there are no hard numbers, it seems that gay men have found a far more welcoming home in individual sports. It was an open secret among tennis players and officials that Bill Tilden was a homosexual, and he became the greatest champion in his sport in the first half of the 20th century. Greg Louganis utterly dominated diving during the 1980s. In 1994, he revealed that he was gay. Rudy Galindo won the U.S. Figure Skating Championship in 1996, and moreover, he had already openly declared his homosexuality.
I had men who were gay in figure skating tell me that they felt at home in figure skating, that when they finally found figure skating, it was a perfect fit for them.
I think that there is a certain sense of individual personal liberty and freedom and expression in something like ice skating that is, you know, always have been dominated by gay men.
People veer to places where they feel like they have a chance to be successful. If you're good at math, you know, you veer towards a job in medicine or science or something. And if you're a great athlete, you're going to follow someone you can connect with. People don't know what Greg Louganis meant to young boys and girls who wanted to dive, especially if someone fortunate enough to kind of understand themselves at a young age and say, hey, you know, look what this guy does. You know, nobody's talking about it, but I know, and you know, and he knows. But individual sports are much different because if you're good, nobody can take you out of the arena.
The 1970s saw women fighting for equal status in America, both in the workplace and on the playing field.
Women athletes will finally get the attention that they deserve through the years.
Right in the middle of the women's movement was tennis star Billie Jean King. She took the battle between the sexes onto the tennis court, and she helped create the Women's Tennis Association. But even as King became a genuine American hero, she faced enormous pressure to keep her homosexuality a secret.
I had been told earlier, people who were close to me, that I should not say anything. In fact, I was told in the early 70s, or late, actually mid-70s, if I said anything, that we probably wouldn't have a tour.
King kept the truth under wraps. She was, however, outed when a lover brought a palimony suit against her in 1981.
There's been so much damage done to Larry and people that I care about, and people in the tennis world, my parents. And
the professional tour she had started was strong enough to survive, but Billie Jean's own life was instantly changed.
I lost millions of dollars overnight. Within 24 hours, I lost every contract except one, and I didn't take it because they offered me so much less money, and I was just so crushed.
Women in athletics heard the echo from earlier times loud and clear. Any women's sport that was perceived to be too lesbian could not prosper in the mainstream. The LPGA fought that image by trotting out its most visible straight beauties, like Jan Stevenson and Laura Baugh.
Hey, Laura Baugh, Ultra Bright Toothpaste would like to proposition you.
Right here? On national television?
The association was peddling heterosexuality and sex appeal. Stevenson was a top golfer and the LPGA's pinup girl.
I can remember playing an event and Ray Volpe called and said, we need you to fly to Atlanta and do a press conference and maybe a photo shoot and meet a potential sponsor because Billie Jean had just come out and said something about a gay relationship. And he said, I really want to use you to promote the fact that we know you're not gay and show the new image of the LPGA.
When I tee off, my timing has to be perfect.
I put the first woman athlete on the cover of Sport magazine, and the woman I chose was Jan Stevenson. And Jan was not the greatest golfer in the world. She was certainly not the greatest female athlete in the world, but she was very pretty, and she looked great on the cover of the magazine.
One of Stevenson's contemporaries would clash with the marketing schemes of the professional associations. Martina Navratilova was outed in 1981 in a newspaper article. Approaching the height of her career, Navratilova decided to live openly as a lesbian. Today, she remains one of the few lesbian athletes to have made that choice.
The charade that a lot of them put on, you know, they put on the makeup and wear the skirts when they really want to be wearing shorts. When they want to look at their partner and blow him a kiss or give him a hug, but they're looking elsewhere, or they even go as far as, you know, putting their arm around a man. It's extremely draining. It takes away from so much of who you are, and I think it really would affect your game in the long run. There's no question about it. Nobody that I know wants to go back in the closet. It's an extremely freeing experience, and I wish more of them would find the guts to do it, because they will play better golf or tennis or whatever sport, and they will feel better about themselves, and they will be happier as people, you know. It'll feed the soul. Right now, the soul suffers. When you're in the closet, the soul suffers, and that's no good for anybody.
It was left to Hollywood to pull back the curtain on a lesbian's life in sport. The film was called Personal Best, and it appeared in 1982, starring Mariel Hemingway and Patrice Donnelly.
We went to a sneak preview in Seattle, and it was with Chariots of Fire. We didn't know this, and there were a lot of church people there. So naturally, I was, you know, getting the white knuckles sitting there. And there was somebody sitting next to me, and after about 10 minutes, he leaned over and he said, you know, all the lesbians in the world are going to be in love with you. And I went, oh, really?
I'm just thinking my whole life is over. I mean, everything I've worked for up to now.
Bullshit. You could go to Moscow in 80. You've got everything. Speed, strength, flexibility, everything I always wanted. You've got. If I had what you have, I'd...
Why?
When the film opened, it's funny. I just didn't know what to expect. I really didn't. And the lights went on, and a lot of women turned around. They were climbing over their seats, coming over to me like, I want to thank you, Miss Donnelly, and shaking my hand, and it made me feel so good. I thought, great, terrific.
If personal best brought homosexuality within women's sports to the mainstream, traditional roles dominated men's games. Men's sport has never been bashful about selling the most basic, vivid heterosexuality. Glamorous babes are used without subtlety to appeal to the predominantly male audiences. Ring girls are a staple of boxing, and whereas cheerleading began way back in 1898 with an all-male crew, by the Second World War, men had gone to fight, and female cheerleaders were being phased in. Then in 1972, Tex Schramm, the general manager of the Dallas Cowboys, embraced sports as entertainment when he joined beauty with the Beasts. The Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders became the Vestal Virgins of sport. They couldn't date the players, but they had tremendous crossover appeal. The queens of the bare midriff were everywhere, even on the Love Boat.
Oh, I didn't expect to find such a young captain.
It seemed like we had the Midas touch. Didn't matter what we did, it turned to gold.
Very simple. SEX. They sold sex. Sexy girls, bare midriffs, shorts. Exciting part of the game. You know, it is part of the game.
We were all-American girls who loved their football team, loved their families. And we were picked and developed and groomed so that there was somebody for everybody.
In time, almost every team in the NFL and the NBA had replicated the Cowboy cheerleaders. And in basketball, where the atmosphere is more intimate and the players more visible, the sexual energy was even more intense.
The NBA life, as far as a job, was harder than I thought it was going to be. You know, you don't pay attention to the game you're playing because you have to play another game the next night, so you got 3 games in 1 week out of 2 different cities and then back at home. As far as the life, you know, the money, the fame, the women that everyone talks about, that was exactly as I thought it was going to be, and I was happy that it was exactly like.
Ground zero of sex and sports in the 1980s was the Forum in Los Angeles, where Magic Johnson led Showtime. And Showtime kept right on going during timeouts, led by the Laker girls.
I made a point of when I took over that I was going to hire dancers who knew how to radiate sexuality.
And it was very distracting. And then you had to worry about Magic and Kareem, which was on top of it, was why they won 5 championships. It was unbelievable. You know, I had to go to chiropractor the next day because I had a crick on this side of my neck and that side of my neck. You know, I had whiplash from doing this. And one time, Chuck was talking, and I stood on this angle and act like I was looking at what he was writing just so I can glance up and see what the Laker girls are doing every 5 seconds. Going, whew. And then it was so cool, you know, to get foul trouble, so you had to sit, so you had to see what was going on. This was the sexiest place, and everyone came to see Magic do his thing. You know, he was Broadway, television, and Hollywood all at once, but on the court.
One front row seat at the Laker show was occupied by a most unlikely personality. A.C. Green, a deeply religious player committed to celibacy, joined the Lakers in 1985.
different ones on the team had a bet that I would not really be one to focus on abstinence. Once I got into the league, it was like 6 weeks they had a bet. They were like, we give you 6 weeks and you will not be talking any of this abstinence stuff. You won't be talking any Christian stuff. You just won't be talking about nothing, but I want to get with that girl right there.
It was like a jazz band. I mean, women flock to jazz musicians because there's something very sexual in what they do. And it was the same with Magic and that whole crew. I mean, they put a dress, quote unquote, on a whole bunch of teams that came through the Forum, and people showed up to see it.
Once you went there, you didn't care really what happened on the court because you were looking around to see who was there and what they were wearing and just trying to get close to them. And the mystique was always there, but at the same time, you were expected to somehow make connection and have some kind of sexual experience with somebody inside of that arena on a nightly basis.
Since I've been in the sports world, I always remember having a sense of women being everywhere. I think it is a part of it. I think they do have a lot of pressure, and there are a lot of women that are always there. And, that groupie piece is a realistic piece. They're there.
You gotta get him, bitch.
We got 3 minutes.
If the groupie scene became more visible during the 1980s in the NBA, there have always been women who have thrown themselves at athletes. The teen girls is perhaps the nicest name sports groupies have been given. In baseball, they're known as Annies.
You want to dance?
Yeah.
She's dancing with me. Afraid not, pal.
You boys gonna fight over the little Meg?
The most famous baseball Annie was portrayed by Susan Sarandon in Bull Durham.
You want me to tuck you in?
Annie, you can't seduce me.
Sweetie, I'm not gonna try to seduce you.
There's not much respect for women in particular. They're easy to come by as another commodity that we as athletes can have. You can either buy them or you can just run across them and trade them in sooner or later. I mean, and that's the mentality that you have to deal with.
Definitely, and especially years ago, in the 60s and the 70s, it seemed like all the players, even the married players, all they ever concerned themselves with was getting laid.
Hey, I'm Millie.
I'm married.
It does tend to attract people, and does, basically you just have to throw your glove out there. You don't really have to work very hard if you want to go in that direction, because the doors are already open. I mean, the easiest line in the world is, hey, we're playing the Reds tonight. What are you doing? You want 4 tickets? Come on and watch us play tonight. We'll meet you after the game.
You're taking your show on the road, and you're on tour, and, as soon as you hit the ground and you get on that team bus and you go to the arena or to your hotel, they're there.
I got a bouquet of roses, and they had, underwear tied to them. Girls sent, pictures, and then, showed up, at the games, and then, just kind of try to follow us to a restaurant, and then, came into the men's bathroom at this place, and I was just like, are you kidding me? What do you think? I'm like, all right, what lengths you go to meet somebody. I don't know, you're caught in between being honored and being like, what is she gonna do to me, you know what I'm saying?
I had some really good veterans, even guys who weren't on my team, who literally sent certain women to me to try to get me. And once they got me in position, explain who sent them. Cliff Livingston sent somebody, and I thought I thought I was just sexy. And she played it to a hilt, and then said, never do this could happen, never do that, never do that, never do that. She told me this, she told me too much. So she taught me before I got in the league.
Although the dance between the athlete and the groupie will probably never end, for once, on November 7th, 1991, the music stopped.
Because of the HIV virus that I have attained, I will have to retire from the Lakers.
We were actually at practice at Loyola Marymount, and we were told we had a special meeting to go over to the Forum.
I was in Potomac, Maryland, back east. And I recall vividly, I was in my family room, and there was some news flash.
My whole system, because I was tight with her, still am, fell to the ground. couldn't believe that was happening.
You can't compare it to anything. I mean, unfortunately, it's one of those late night death calls that you can't get at home sometimes. And I mean, that's just exactly what happened.
Magic didn't run away from the spotlight. The day after his announcement, he appeared on the Arsenio Hall show. He stood silent on stage as more than 3 minutes of applause flooded over him.
You called and said, I want to come on. Why?
Well, I think that the message is clear that I want everybody to understand that having the HIV virus, that I want everybody to practice safe sex.
For all the support Magic received that night, there was also a distinct uneasiness about his disease and what it might mean.
I'm far from being homosexual. You already know that. And everybody else who close to me understand that. But see, that's the whole thing that they think can only happen to gay people, and that's so wrong.
Well, they all felt very sorry for him, didn't they, that he got it. Had he been a gay man, or had he admitted to homosexual sex, then they would have said he got what he had coming.
I think people were very afraid of the possibility that Magic Johnson was gay. Because if he were gay, in the mindset of these, macho team sports, then we would have to rethink what is male.
I am going to go on, I'm going to beat it, and I'm going to have fun. Okay, so thank you again, and I'll see you soon.
Magic's revelation was something of a benchmark. Never again would the promiscuity of male athletes be so easily accepted, let alone celebrated. When Wilt Chamberlain wrote that he had slept with 20,000 women, he was surprised to find himself criticized, even lampooned as a figure of fun. But America was also revising its opinions about women athletes and their sexuality. Never was this new attitude more apparent than in 1999, when the U.S. women's soccer team drove to the final of the World Cup.
When you watch these kids play soccer, it's thrilling. I mean, it really is a beautiful game, and the way they play it, I mean, the athleticism and the grace with which they approach the contest is superb. And what a nice, great bunch of terrific athletes, nice people, and certifiable babes.
These babes, these chicks just charged through the door. They're 5'10", they're 150 pounds. They're happy to call themselves babes, which was a wonderful issue in itself. And they were confident, they were smiling, they looked good, healthy, all-American. This ultimate act of, I know I'm good, I'm gonna win, out of my way. And I think that really, really carried over.
The U.S. women swept through to the championship game, not only acclaimed as great athletes, but as the residents of Babe City. On July 10, 1999, before the largest crowd ever to watch a women's sporting event, they faced off against the Chinese in the Rose Bowl.
And it was almost like a giant heartbeat, 90,000 fans whose hearts were all beating at the same time. It was just a very unique experience.
It was absolutely an incredible moment to be at that place at that time, watching women's sports explode, literally explode, in an American venue that is synonymous with men's sports.
But at the very climax, in the penalty kick shoot-off, when Brandi Chastain scored the winning goal, America's eyes opened even wider. In her consummate joy, Chastain ripped off her jersey, and although her breast remained covered, the witch's brew of sex and women's sport bubbled over as never before.
With a woman, it's instantly thought of as sexual. With a man, he can whip off his shirt and it's
No big deal. His shirt might smell. He might be happy. He's not thinking. But if we do something like that, it's got to have some implications with sponsors. So I end up on a calendar next month, or there must be something covert going on, you know, in the sexual realm. It's not just spontaneous celebration.
Men interpreted that as a sexual act, and what they saw was her breasts. And what women and girls saw was an athlete celebrating something she had worked very hard for and her team had worked very hard for.
I see it as some sort of act of exuberance, of independence, and maybe it's the highest form of sexuality because it's not sexual at all. It's, you know, I am who I am, and you figure it out.
If Brandi Chastain had not been good looking, that wouldn't have resonated, because we would have said, this is weird, but we would have said, oh, an ugly woman just took off her shirt. And American men would not have been as intrigued.
Reactions to Chastain's Rose Bowl moment were complicated by the choice she had made to be featured in a men's sport magazine in far more revealing poses. Chastain is not alone. At a time when women athletes receive as little as 1/10 of the press coverage given to men, elite women athletes from around the world are baring their bodies for the camera.
It's not necessarily a bad thing to have people start watching a sport for superficial reasons when, you know, as they go along, they realize, hey, you know, there's a lot to this sport, and then they start appreciating the finer nuances.
Good for them. I think it's great for. I agree with them. I think it's great. It draws attention to their career and their sports, and why not? I mean, I know that if they're posing nude, they must look pretty good, and that's hard work to get to look that good.
It's almost like women make a deal with the public, and the public is dominated by men, saying, if you let us be strong and successful, we will also act vulnerable and coy and sexy.
There's the suspicion that women who are great athletes are somehow not completely women. Even people who support women's sports make them hyper-feminine to make sure that there's no question that they're totally and completely women.
I don't think that the feminist movement had this in mind when they wanted equality.
Many women have been especially infuriated at the attention paid to Anna Kournikova. Even though she has never won a tournament, the young Russian has become a genuine worldwide phenomenon. The #1 sports attraction on the internet, a huge drawing card at tournaments, and with many millions of dollars in endorsements, one of the world's highest paid athletes, male or female. She is also the rare woman athlete to make the cover of Sports Illustrated, a magazine whose biggest seller each year is its swimsuit issue.
Win. Do something that is worthy of the cover of Sports Illustrated. And then if you're attractive, great. Absolutely, that's great. But would Sports Illustrated ever consider putting the best-looking male tennis player who has never won a tournament on its cover? I can't imagine.
It's funny, you know, she's made more money than I ever made in my career already. She's a good player. I think she can do better. I hope she will do better. But she's not taking anything away from anybody. You know, those dollars are not there for other players to take.
It's got to irritate, certainly it irritates Kournikova's peers, I suppose, that all the attention she's getting, but yet she's good for the sport. I think today women's tennis, as we sit here in the year 2000, women's tennis is a more interesting sport than men's tennis, I think, to most people.
I think that women's tennis was huge before Kournikova was around. And I think that Wimbledon was packed watching the likes of Martina and Billie Jean King play. It might help the sport in the times that it's slow or it needs a kick, but that's not what's going to make it a well-respected, well-marketed sport.
We're much more portrayed as sex objects more than the guys, and I would like that to shift as much as possible. I'm defined, I'm strong, I'm muscular, I'm a winner, I'm competent in what I do, and if we keep it in that context when we take a photo, then I love it.
The story of sports and sex is ongoing and unique. Sport reflects society's attitudes towards sex. But the long reach of athletics does even more, actually driving ideas about sexuality. Almost all of us have played sports, and in that way, almost all of us have been affected by the power we have given sport to shape what it is to be a real man or a real woman. The roots of this power reach back to the beginning of the 20th century and beyond. And though we're a long way from the earliest attitudes about sex and sport, we're still connected to them. The question for the 21st century is whether we can free ourselves from the narrow and damaging ways that sports and sex have mixed, so that all athletes and spectators can revel in the pure sensual joy of watching beautiful bodies doing miraculous things.
Even today, sex before competition is a no-no, because the key to being successful in the ring is remaining committed and focused. Television.
They said, man, you play the same way every single night. I'm tired of this. And they wonder where the strength comes from. Well, I'm not wasting it in other places.
Sex before competition, I think if you do it right, it's not a good idea.
But that whole attitude, if you have sex and totally weakens your legs, yeah, it weakens your legs. For a guy like me who has, you know, maybe 130% more energy, I don't mind going to the game at 100%. You know what I'm saying?
Shortly after Wilt Chamberlain's book came out, we were having dinner with Wilt, and they were, my wife was with us, and another woman was with us, and they were both needling Wilt rather strongly about his claims of 20,000 sexual experiences. So finally, at one point during dinner, my wife reached over and touched his elbow and said, "Does that count?"
This has been a presentation of HBO Sports, the network of champions.